Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees.
Episode 103, Charlotte the Convict. Acknowledgement to Rhonda Arthur, who wrote the story on Charlotte Harris for the Female Convict Research Centre Incorporated in 2019. The centre is an amazing source of female convict information, and they've given me permission to reference information to help create this episode. There was profound silence as Mr. Justice Creswell put on the black cap and sentenced Charlotte Harris to be hanged by the neck till you are dead, and may the Lord have mercy on your soul. Her counsel immediately pleaded a stay of execution, stating that she was pregnant. The doors of the court were kept closed, and the judge then ordered the sentence to be suspended until the infant was born. Charlotte Harris fainted. Charlotte Harris was born on the 25th of February 1818 in Town Lane, Shepton Mallet, Somerset, England, as Charlotte Millard, the daughter of John Millard, a soldier, and Mary Millard. Her first appearance in court was on the 17th of February 1840, when Charlotte Millard, also known as Charlotte Miller, aged 21, was confined in Ilchester Jail awaiting trial at the next Bath Sessions, charged with assault and robbery of a shawl. The woman she allegedly assaulted unfortunately died from injuries sustained by hitting her head on the curb. At the trial, Charlotte Miller was found not guilty and acquitted. In 1842, Charlotte married Henry Marchant in Walcott. Henry was 4 years younger than Charlotte being 23 and Henry 19 when they married. They had a daughter Sarah, who was born in 1846. In early 1849, the family resided at 13 Angel Place, Lower Bristol Road, at Walcott, Bath, and by all accounts in comfort, and there was never any discord. On Saturday the 31st of March 1849, Henry had a few drinks with fellow quarrymen after work, and a neighbour heard him arrive home about midnight, merrily singing a ditty, and not long afterwards he heard Charlotte's footsteps on the stairs, followed by sounds of stoking of a fire and the rattling of a teapot. Later he heard Henry groaning and vomiting. On the Monday, Henry went to work as usual but was unwell and returned home. Mr. Lloyd, the parish surgeon, was sent for, but there was confusion over the address he was given, which delayed his arrival until later that day. By the time he saw Henry, there was no particular point of pain, and he ordered a blister and mustard poultice to be applied, together with a diet of gruel and tea. The last time Mr. Lloyd saw Henry alive was on Friday the 6th of April 1849, and though the symptoms were serious, there was nothing to cause suspicion. The following day, writhing in pain, Henry suddenly said, "I was drunk, wasn't I?" clenched his fists and died. He was only 30 years old. Henry's funeral was held on Friday the 13th of April 1849 at St Saviour's Church, Walcott. Charlotte was known by sight to residents of Walcott and known as the Orange Woman. She'd started at a stall selling oranges near the market at Bath Street. At first they were sympathetic to the loss of her husband, but then rumours circulated that she'd met a sweetheart at the market who jokingly said it was a pity that she wasn't a widow. The day after Henry Marchant's death, Charlotte moved her belongings to 15 Brookleys Buildings, Lark Hall, and on Monday the 16th of April returned to St Saviour's Church in Bath to marry William Harris. Although it wasn't unusual for women to remarry soon after their husbands had died, the whirlwind romance of William Harris and Charlotte caused considerable excitement in the community. He was in his early 70s and she was at this stage only 32. The rumour mill gained momentum when it was revealed that William Harris had buried 2 wives in the last 12 months and had recently asked 2 other women to marry him. His second wife, Louisa Perry, died on the 1st of February 1849, and her relatives had not been informed. It was presumed that she misled him as to her financial position and was in good health up until the marriage. This, along with a quick subsequent marriage, created suspicion that her death may not have been from natural causes. There was talk of William Harris trying to obtain arsenic, supposedly to kill butterflies, and of Charlotte going to Mr. Bright's chemist shop to buy arsenic to kill rats, and had taken Hannah Shaler with her. The suspicion was that they really wanted it to poison their respective spouses. Some of these rumours and suspicions eventually induced the mayor to make an application to the coroner. A jury was summoned and they ordered that Henry's body be exhumed for a post-mortem examination. William Herapath, an eminent analytical chemist of Bristol, was engaged to conduct an analysis of Henry's remains of his stomach, intestines and liver. He thought Henry's onset of retching and pain in the stomach was caused by poison and might not have been given in the tea, but it must have been administered twice, and the second time was for no more than 24 hours prior to his death. The symptoms of the last illness, sickness, cramps and acute pains in the stomach followed the administration of poison, and it was highly likely to have been in the pearl barley. He concluded that Henry died of arsenic poisoning. The Harrises' honeymoon period was brief. They were in bed on the 29th of April 1849 when the police arrived around midnight and arrested them on suspicion of murder. William Harris protested his innocence and said, "If she's guilty, I hope they'll hang her." He asserted Charlotte gave him to understand that she was unmarried and intimated that she'd had an aunt living on whose death she expected to receive a legacy. He had lived in St Saviour's for the past 40 years and had been a market gardener. He was married to his first wife for nearly 50 years, who sold his produce by perambulating the streets with a donkey cart. They had 5 children. Most of them had immigrated to the United States of America, with one son doing well who sent him a yearly stipend of £40. Neighbours of William Harris, Daniel Shaler and his wife Hannah, were apprehended on suspicion of being accessories to the murder. Daniel Shaler attended Henry's funeral, despite never having met him. After the funeral, Charlotte gave him some information for William Harris to obtain a marriage licence, and for which he had been promised a sixpence. He helped remove Charlotte's household effects in a donkey cart to the new premises in Lark Hall and was present at her marriage to William Harris. Hannah Shaler had nursed Louisa Harris during her illness and after her death and was kind of a servant to William Harris. Both of them first met Charlotte about 3 weeks prior to Henry's demise and were thought to be in a state of great destitution. However, an inventory of the items at their house found, amongst other things, was a quantity of coins amounting to £83, 5 shillings and 8 pence. Hannah Shaler knew the money was there, but Daniel Shaler said he didn't know there was more than 50 shillings in the house. It was never reported whether Hannah Shaler had made any attempts to obtain money by deceit. The inquest proceeded on the 30th of April 1849 and the marketplace was crowded with people hoping to catch a glimpse of the accused. When the prisoners arrived, they were met with hisses and cries and ushered through a rear door. A large number of magistrates were present to observe the proceedings, and the room was filled to capacity. Since her arrest, Charlotte had been hysterical and held her head down low, while William Harris seemed to pay particular attention to the proceedings. At the Harris's house, the police seized a jar containing a light colour powder, a pot of pearl barley and a teapot. The powder was found to be freestone and there was no sign of arsenic in either of the pots. A search at Shaler's house was conducted in the presence of Daniel Shaler. A packet of blue powder labelled Cocculus indicus peris, poison, he said was used to make beer strong, and in another small paper packet he said it was very likely containing arsenic, as he used it for all sorts of things for a bad leg. The blue powder was analysed and found to contain 83 grains of white arsenic acid. The inquiry, having ascertained that poison was administered, now had to consider the possibility whether Henry Marchant had committed suicide or whether the poison had been administered by another person. Before proceeding with this line of inquiry, the coroner ordered that Louisa Harris's body be exhumed. Hannah Shaler reportedly said, "Good God, then I'm a dead woman." The post-mortem proved there was chronic inflammation of long standing and also a more recent inflammation of the stomach and intestines, which was sufficient to cause death. The jury then asked to hear further evidence. Mary Ford, a friend and neighbour of Louise Harris, was at her bedside with William Harris and Hannah Shaler on the day she died. Afterwards, they all had a bit of gin and bread, and William Harris laughed, saying he would have another wife within a month. The next day, he had an opportunity to put his amorous pursuit to the test. Elizabeth Turpin, a friend of Louise Harris's sister, arrived to ask him if it was true that Louisa had died. He said he was very glad of it, for she was no good to him and he should look out for another wife. A few days later, she returned to his house and he asked her about his late wife's sister with a view to make an offer of marriage. Before she could give a definite answer whether they would be interested in having him, he wished that she wasn't married, as he would like her for a wife. But his charms failed on Elizabeth Turpin, who curtly replied, "I wouldn't like to have an old man like you." William Harris then tried to woo Harriet Macaulay, a widow, who was on her way to Lambridge when it started snowing and she went into an inn. He followed her inside and asked if she had heard him call out to shelter under his umbrella. He told her that he was recently widowed and said, "I think you would make a very good wife." At first she resisted his advances, but he persisted until she promised to have tea at his house. While she was there, he asked if she needed any money and proposed marriage, but she turned him down, dryly saying, "We should let the dead get cold first before we thought of another." About a fortnight later, she saw William Harris in the marketplace talking to a woman who was selling oranges. Mr. Bright, the chemist, sold some arsenic to a woman named Virtue Bullock and her companion Jane Hunt, who acted as a witness. Other witnesses deposed that they were sure it was Charlotte that they had seen in the shop, but these witnesses proved to be unreliable. Mr. Harries laughed when William Harris asked him for arsenic to kill butterflies and refused his request. After considering the evidence, the jury concluded that Henry died from the effects of poison administered to him by Charlotte. William Harris, Daniel Shaler and Hannah Shaler were all found not guilty and discharged. The coroner issued a warrant for Charlotte's arrest on a charge of willful murder, and she was remanded in Taunton Jail. The trial commenced at the Bridgewater Assizes on the 31st of July 1849, and throughout the proceedings Charlotte often burst into tears and had fainting spells. Hannah Shaler stated that Charlotte told her in early April 1849 that her sister was visiting and had become dangerously ill. However, the illness turned out to be untrue. When her sister Mary Ann Miller was called to the stand, Charlotte fainted and the case was stood down until she regained consciousness. Mary Ann Miller was again called, but this time she fainted and had to be removed until she regained her composure. From the cross-examination of witnesses, Charlotte and Henry appeared to live very happily together. Mr. Lloyd had mixed up all the medicines and there was no arsenic in them, and he did not keep any arsenic in his surgery. He thought Charlotte was caring and had shown great kindness towards Henry during his illness. Mr. Saunders, counsel for Charlotte, addressed the jury, contending that the reason Charlotte married William Harris so shortly after the death of Henry was the opportunity of having her home and to keep herself from poverty. The judge took nearly 2 hours to minutely sum up the evidence, and the jury took just under an hour to reach a verdict. They concluded that Charlotte was the only person who could have administered the poison. The judge agreed with their finding, though he was unable to speculate why Charlotte committed the crime. At this time, there was a groundswell of people calling for the abolition of capital punishment as being cruel and immoral. Charles Gilpin was also active in organising the petitions for clemency on behalf of Charlotte, and on the 8th of November 1849, he presented petitions with 15,000 signatories to Sir George Grey at the Home Office. Queen Victoria, who herself was pregnant, called on her maternal instincts to take pity on Charlotte. The plea was not to palliate her grievance offence, but that capital punishment fostered rather than prevented crimes, and public hangings were scenes of terror that only gratified the depraved appetite of the uneducated masses for violence and blood. Her case was the catalyst of 44 petitions for clemency received from parishes and counties throughout England, Scotland and Ireland, with 40,000 signatories collectively called the Women of England. Queen Victoria, in her benevolence, granted a reprieve, and Charlotte's sentence was mitigated to 2 years solitary confinement and then transportation for life. Charlotte's son, Henry Marchant, was born in Taunton Jail on the 19th of December 1849, contrary to various newspaper reports that the infant was stillborn or Charlotte had died. Charlotte named him after her late husband, Henry Marchant, and it is quite likely he was the father. There were instructions not to take the child from its mother. Arrangements were then made to have them sent to Millbank Prison to await transportation. Charlotte's daughter, Sarah Ann Marchant, had been placed in the Bath workhouse, but was allowed to go with them. The Anna Maria set sail on the 8th of October 1851. Henry Marchant, aged 2, now called Henry Harris, was the first to be put on the sick list on the 17th of October 1851. He was pale, emaciated and very fretful, suffering pain in the bowels and bore marks of bad nutrition, having been brought up in the workhouse. He was treated with calomel and opium and kept on an arrowroot diet with a tablespoon of port wine 3 times a day. But there was little improvement and he wasted away. He died at sea on the 26th of October 1851. And the ship's surgeon's report stated, "This case occurred in a child of cachectic appearance, severe weight loss, muscle wasting and general debility. He's been brought up in a workhouse and badly fed. He was pale, emaciated and experienced very pitiful suffering from pain. The child continued wasting until the 26th when he died." The ship anchored in Hobart Town on the 25th of January 1852. Charlotte and Sarah Ann Marchant, aged 6, having been reunited on the voyage once again, had to be separated. Charlotte went to the Cascades factory and Sarah Ann was admitted to the Queen's Orphan School in Hobart Town. Charlotte was then sent to work as a convict housemaid at the barracks. There is no record of any breach or neglect of duty until the 30th of January 1853, when she was charged with absconding, having failed to report at the factory on the 17th of January. She claimed that a person at the factory had told her, as she was to be gazetted for marriage, she need not report herself or go into the factory. This was against the rules and Charlotte was sentenced to 12 months' imprisonment. In April 1853, she was transferred to work for Mr. Orr at New Wharf, and in September that year was transferred to Captain King. On the 30th of November 1853, Charlotte was granted permission to marry John Burns, a free man, who had been transported on the Anson in 1844. His indent record describes him as a love child from Laleham, Middlesex, and having no relatives. He was sentenced to 14 years transportation for stealing 3 pairs of spectacles. He had a prior conviction for stealing books and was imprisoned for 3 months for that offence. John Burns and Charlotte were married in St George's Church of England, Hobart, on the 2nd of January 1854. John's occupation was a hawker at the time of their marriage. John was 48 and Charlotte 37. A son, John, was born on the 14th of October 1854, but it was 3 years before Sarah Ann Marchant was discharged from the Queen's Orphan School when Charlotte received her ticket of leave. Charlotte's ticket of leave was issued on the 26th of June 1855. She was recommended for a conditional pardon on the 15th of July 1856 and received this on the 9th of June 1857. John Burns died of dropsy on the 16th of October 1860 at his residence in 75 Patrick Street, Hobart, at the age of 56. 2 years later, on the 18th of July 1862, Charlotte died of consumption, or in other words, tuberculosis. Sarah Ann Marchant, now called Sarah Ann Burns, aged 14, and her half-brother John Burns, aged 8, were now orphaned. He was placed in the Queen's Orphan School in Hobart on the 24th of September 1862. And what became of William Harris? Well, William Harris died on the 28th of March 1850 at Bumbalong near Bradford and is buried at Walcott Chapel, burial ground at Bath, and he never married again. Charlotte's children? Well, Sarah Ann Marchant, known as Sarah Ann Burns, married Michael John Malone in Hobart on the 26th of December 1877 at the Trinity Church, and it says they were both from Oatlands at the time of their marriage. Sarah died in March 1929 in West Ulverstone. The chief mourners were Mr. M. Malone, her son, Mrs. Boucher and Mrs. George, her nieces, and then the notice was in the Advocate at Burnie on the 12th of March 1929. There was another child, Charlotte, of Sarah's that wasn't mentioned in her death notice. So the 2 children, Michael John Thomas Henry Malone, was born at Oatlands on the 2nd of February 1883, and Charlotte Mary Ann Victoria Malone was born at Oatlands on the 2nd of May 1887. She married Hubert Morris Shepherd at Ulverstone at the Holy Trinity Church in 1903. They had 2 children, Dorothy, born in 1904, and Arnold in 1905. Hubert Shepherd put a notice in the Northwest Post on the 6th of April 1907. I, the undersigned, will not be responsible for any debts incurred by my wife, Charlotte Shepherd, from this date. So at some point, something has gone wrong in the marriage. Usually that notice is only put up if separation has occurred. On the 21st of September 1918, An article mentions Hubert Shepherd. It says, while working at the limestone bins at the Devonport Wharf, on the 14th of September, Hubert Morris Shepherd, a middle-aged man, slipped and fell. 4 trucks passed over him, killing him instantly. On the 27th of May 1919, an article outlines the action for damages. £2,000 claimed, Shepherd versus Railways. In Hobart, some months ago, Hubert Shepherd, a railway employee, died from injuries sustained while engaging in shunting trucks at the Broken Hill Lime Quarry at Devonport. The accident is said to have been caused by a runaway truck coming into collision with the one that Shepherd was working at. An action was instituted by Dorothy Mary Shepherd and Arnold Shepherd, infants, through their guardian, Caroline Shepherd, against the Railway Department, claiming £2,000 damages for the death of the children's father, plaintiffs alleging negligence on the part of the department's servants. Today, before Justice Crisp at the Practice Court, the Solicitor General applied for leave to plead several matters on the pending case, introducing the plea of not guilty. Mr. Arthur Butler for plaintiffs opposed the application on the grounds that not guilty was sufficient in itself. The objection was upheld with costs against the Crown. However, on the 28th of June 1819, so a month later, another article saying echo of railway accident, money paid into court. Before Mr. Justice Crisp yesterday in the Practice Court in the case of Shepherd versus the Commissioner of Railways, application was made by the Solicitor General to alter his plea from one of not guilty to one of guilty and payment into court of the £400 compensation claimed. The claim was made by Mr. A.L. Butler on behalf of Caroline Shepherd for Dorothy and Arnold Shepherd, children of Hubert M. Shepherd, who was killed in a railway accident at Devonport. In consenting to the order, Mr. Butler asked that the summons should be amended to enable the judge to order the apportioning of the amount paid into court and also to whom it should be paid. The Solicitor General consented to the summons being amended, and His Honour ordered the amount to be apportioned equally between the 2 infant children and should be paid to the public trustee to hold in trust for them. And John Burns, Charlotte's son that she had with John Burns Sr., he became a police constable and he married twice and had a total of 12 children. The North West Post on the 23rd of August 1902 says J. Burns desires to thank his customers in Ulverstone and outlying districts of North Motton, Sprent, Pine Road, Riana, Kindred for their kind patronage and support, and hopes by promptness and reliability combined with fair charges to merit a continuance of the same. His new business premises will be found in Queen Street, West Ulverstone, drapery, grocery, stationery on hand, and to order all the best and at the lowest cash prices. J. Burns, Queen Street, West Ulverstone. He died in 1908 at West Ulverstone. His first wife was Ellen Jones, and she was born in 1858. John and Ellen married at St Paul's Catholic Church, Oatlands, on the 2nd of February 1874, and she died on the 11th of November 1883, aged 26. They had 5 children together. The first was Charlotte Ann Burns, born at Oatlands on the 2nd of July 1874. She married John Boucher on the 24th of August 1894 at her father's residence at Sheffield, Kentishbury, Tasmania. John was a farmer who owned the property Wesley Vale, and this was the niece that was mentioned in the death record. The second child that John had with Ellen Jones was John Luke Owen Burns, and he was born on the 23rd of November 1876. He died in 1915 at Ulverstone, and the North Western Advocate and Emu Bay Times outlined his death, sudden death at Ulverstone. An inquest was held yesterday by Coroner Nichols into the circumstances connected with the death of J.L.O. Burns, who died suddenly yesterday morning. Ellen Frances Burns deposed, "I'm the wife of the late J.L.O. Burns and resided with him at West Ulverstone. My husband left home about 10 o'clock on the evening of the 29th of August for the purpose of taking up his duties as night watchman for the town of Ulverstone. He was quite well when he left home. He had not been in robust health since an operation last March. He started work as a night watchman on the 3rd of July. Since then he had complained of feeling unwell, but he was in the brightest of spirits when he left home. When I next saw him was at Mr. Arthur Horsham's residence. He was sitting in his chair with his head to one side and his life was extinct. I held his hand and Mr. Horsham went to the police. Constable Kirkham came and we laid the deceased on a sofa. About 6:40 a.m, Horsham came and said, "I don't know what's the matter with Jack, he's collapsed." He was 38 years of age on the 23rd of November 1914 and was a native of Oatlands, Tasmania. Arthur Horsham deposed that I reside at Ulverston and I know the deceased, J.L.O. Burns. At 6:10 this morning, the deceased came to my house and he said, "I saw there was a light and I called in. I opened the door and he entered. We talked together for some time. He then made a gurgling noise and his head fell to one side. I thought he fainted and went for his wife, but he was dead when Mrs. Burns and myself reached him and had not changed his position. I went for the police a few minutes afterwards. Constable Kirkham came at once. There was nothing in his manner to suggest him being unwell. He said he had been unwell on the previous Saturday. The coroner returned the verdict that the death resulted from natural causes." The third child was Eliza Jane Burns, born in Bothwell on the 29th of January 1879. The fourth child, Mary Agnes Burns, was born in Bothwell on the 12th of February 1881 and she died at Bothwell on the 24th of October 1881, aged 8 months and 12 days. And Eleanor Burns was born at Emu Bay on the 3rd of November 1883 and she died at Oatlands on the 18th of January 1884 under Ellen Burns, aged 10 weeks. And the second wife of John Burns was Charlotte Barnett Smith and she was born in 1864. They married at St Joseph's Catholic Church, Emu Bay, on the 12th of July 1884 and she died in November 1931 at West Ulverston. Their first child was Ada Victoria Burns, who was born at Emu Bay on the 15th of April 1885, and John Burns was stationed at Burnie at this time. The next child was Sarah Ann Burns, who was born at Emu Bay on the 16th of June 1886. William, born at Waratah on the 17th of June 1888. Henry, born at Sheffield on the 24th of June 1891, where it was stated in an article that John Burns was a constable at Sheffield. Then Florence Mary Burns, born at Sheffield on the 18th of October 1892. Then Alfred James, born Sheffield 4th of January 1895. And it says in February 1896 that there was a presentation to police constables. A very pleasing ceremony took place at Wilson's Hotel, Sheffield on Wednesday evening as Constable Burns was being promoted to Railton. And the last child, Isla Vicky Burns, was born at Railton on the 24th of November 1897. Interesting that the two children of Charlotte, Sarah and John, both named their firstborn daughters Charlotte. And Sarah and John are both buried at the Church of England Cemetery at Ulverston.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.